Hello and welcome back to this edition of Daily Actives brought to you by Bootleg Macro. I am Dustin. We are looking at the most active stocks in Yahoo Finance. So I've got listed on the right over here. It looks like, based on what I'm seeing, a pretty regular run of the most common stocks to be the most active. I will say that we've been watching this open run, which has been a phenomenon to say the least, at least what's been going on in the market recently. Open continues to show just a massive move. I mean, this is a 9 month chart. So if you're looking back, you can essentially tell that we have not seen massive moves in open since 2021, which are not even on the chart anymore. So if we're looking here at the past 3 months, this thing has been bananas. I would say it probably started here in July when it was around $1. And then you can see the range expanded. And what I love to see is that we've got a higher high in the range already at 1051. Now, I will say that what we've seen in terms of the price for open here, it has gone above the range very recently on 9/11, RIP. But as we continue to go, like this is a major thing because it going above the top of the range and then coming back down. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to come to the middle, because the middle, if we're going to be looking at open, is probably going to be around $8, which would be a massive drop. But when we're looking at the overall data here, I mean, I'm looking at the sentiment on the daily indicator. We've been bullish and very aggressively bullish again since the end of June. We've been above this 50% line the entire time. Generally, this indicator is going to top out around 60%, but when you get something that's at this price, you can see it's at 70% bullishness on 9/11. And then you start to look at where we are in terms of the 15-day as well. We've continued to maintain above 50%. The volatility has been bonkers, as you would expect when you see something that's going to move like this, traditional volatility. Now, if we're looking at where the price is, the one thing I will say is that we have seen this now in the moderately high zone, which means it is above the normal distribution. Obviously, we've seen it at incredibly high. Like we keep commenting on 9/11, you can see it was extremely high that day. The volume has been very, very high as well. But what I do like is that the volume that we've seen in the past few days has come back into the normal range of volume. The volume does work on the exact same like guide there in terms of the coloration. So seeing it in the green is very positive because that means that we're getting some move higher, but we are also still doing it on consistent volatility or a volume, which is one of the most indicative signs of what is going to be a long-term bull market. So if we're looking here, we've got the 1 day, 5 day, 15 day. I mean, across the board, this thing is positive. I mean, obviously it's bonkers over the past 3 months, but if you're looking at what you'd expect here, I would say personally, I wouldn't mind this thing around $8. Now, I know they'll probably crush a lot of people who are watching this video, but right now, with what you see inside of open, it is one of those things. So now we're going to go ahead and look at Tesla. Tesla's been on a generational run very recently too. Now, if we're looking at it from like the 6 month view, this thing has essentially been going sideways. And even over the 1 year view, obviously you can see what happened at the end of 2024. Essentially, most of 2025 has been kind of sideways. It looks like we're finally starting to get that breakout after I would consider to be a really long base. I don't really pay attention to necessarily like bases or distances or anything like that. I pay attention purely to the price and the range and things. But if I'm looking at what's happening in Tesla now, we can see it's very, very bearish or very, very bullish. That's what the green bars mean. We can see it's breaking up to the top of the range. What we can also see too, especially if we're looking at the 1 month, is that the pricing's been careening over the top of the range for a while here. That is very indicative of something like Tesla. Tesla has the ability to run very, very hot. I'd say it's blessed by the volatility gods to a certain extent. So if we're looking here on the bar chart, it really, again, it's been that base for a while, and it looks like we're now starting to actually break out. What I'd love to see is that this breakout has been on higher volume. Now, it looks like there's been 105 million shares traded as the average for the past 6 months, and we have been very clearly at it, right, for the past few weeks here. It looks like just a few different days, but if you're looking like 1, 2, 3, 4 out of what, 7 days, this thing has been at or above its 105 million shares traded. That's incredible. Now, if we're looking at the indicators in terms of sentiment, you can see very clearly here that we are looking at very bullish sentiment on Tesla as well on the daily as well as the 15-day, which is the 3 week. You can see we've gotten a little bit of a dip every now and again, but that's really actually a good sign. You want to see a little bit of a dip, especially in the 15-day, where you can kind of reset and start to remove and start to go higher and higher. Now, I don't necessarily like that I see the volatility starting to break out because generally I believe that trend reveals itself when volatility is falling, but everybody has a different perspective on that. I do think, again, Tesla is a unique beast because it has been essentially blessed by the volatility god. So if we're looking at the correlations, all that kind of stuff is looking good. The thing that I find to be most remarkable about this is that I was looking somewhere, I think, around like 346, right? You had like 3 days here was around 346, 347. And for me, I could definitely tell that it was bullish. I could tell that we had falling volume. So I was very much considering buying it that day, but then boom, like 3 days later, the thing is at like 100 or it's at like $400. I mean, so the type of moves you see in Tesla are absolutely remarkable. Super impressed to see it. I mean, across the board, we're positive all the way from the 1 day to the 5 day. Even on the 3 month, we're up 27%. For a stock of this size, that's absolutely remarkable. Let's go ahead and look at Nvda. Now, Nvda has been obviously one of the bells of the ball for this entire bull run. I would say that Nvidia is probably going to be the first indication of anything that's going to be negative in the market. Just because this has been essentially the generator of the, I would say, the momentum, the sentiment, kind of the chatter that's happened on the market for a while here, especially if you start to look back. Like, I mean, that my data provider isn't a very good, doesn't do a very good job of when you have like a reverse split like that. But what we're seeing here is that Nvidia, while we're still continuing to have very what look like bullish moves and very aggressive moves, we do look like we're slightly bearish. I would say that we're bearish right now. We haven't made a new high in quite a while. I mean, we have an opportunity to make a new high at like 180. Where are we today? We're at 177. So I would need to see it break that 180. The top of the range is actually not going higher, which I don't like. It's actually starting to come down. The bottom of the range is kind of solidified. Even when we look at the chart here, we can see that it's essentially been bearish since the 21st of August. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to be bearish forever, but it does mean that at the current moment, we're starting to see it be bearish. The thing that I would say that is good, it's actually slightly negative that we saw a higher volume here in the end of August when we started to go bearish, just because that's a turning over of shares, right? Like when you saw it be bearish here at this bottom, and then you started to see it move, yeah, it started to break out. But look, as this breakout happened, you started to see volume above that range pretty consistently, while the price was breaking higher. So now that we're seeing volume higher than that range, while it's going bearish, it's a little concerning. If we're looking at the sentiment here, we can see on the daily, the Nvidia sentiment is pretty much under the 50% line, at least on the daily perspective. We've been down. It looks like ever since, again, the 27th. The 27th was a really big day, it looks like, for this stock. On the 15-day, we're still muddling around the 50%. Looks like we're at 50.4 just as of today. So I'd be very curious to see where this thing goes in the next week or so. It's very much at an inflection point. You're either going to continue to see lower lows, or you're going to see this base and kind of start to break out. Now, if we look at where the price is, the thing that I like is, and this is, I'm just going to give generally the bull case because I don't think there's a reason to really short companies in a market like this, is that it is above its trade level. So it is above that 175.64. It is still bearish, but I do like when you start to see things start to show counter signs to what their sentiment is, especially if you believe that the market is overall going to be in that direction. I do believe the market is bullish right now. So if we're looking at where it's 177, I could definitely see this thing. It's got 186 at the top of the range. I mean, I would love to see above a 186, as well as, honestly, I'd like to see this at 200. Like, I want us to get the range back up to where it must have been. Like, where actually, no, it hasn't even, we haven't broken to the 190s yet in the range once. So I would really like to see this thing break to the 190s. I think that'd be really good. If we're looking at it on the rolling returns, the thing that's nice, again, if you're setting up, is that you're on a 1 month negative return. You do still like that you have a 3 month rolling return. That's a really positive thing. It's still above 20% as well, which is fantastic to see. But you do want to start to see some of this transformation. You really don't want to see a 15-day be negative. That's 3 weeks of data that you'd be looking at. That would be slightly a concern. So Nvidia's got a very interesting setup ahead. I probably would buy that actually. Now let's go ahead and look at Snap. Snap is probably the problem child of all social media. This thing continues to just be an underperformer that has really high vol from time to time. So you can, if you can catch the trade perfectly, you can make some very serious alpha in these things. But if we're looking at what the overall trend has been, it's essentially sideways to down. I mean, yeah, we're coming out of this drop that it looks like we had at the very beginning of August. We essentially based somewhere around like $6. Looks like we're starting to see a little bit of movement higher now. The top of the range, I'm assuming, is going to start breaking a little bit higher, but we'll check as we get down to the data table. If we're looking at the candlestick chart here, again, it looks like after we saw that drop in the very beginning of August, we are looking at essentially a base. Hopefully, this thing can break above what looks like 758, or I mean, $8 is probably what you're really going to be shooting for. But 758, it looks like is going to be an important level for this thing to clear. You're probably going to want it to clear 780, just because that was the beginning of the break, and then probably close this section, which is all the way up at like 9. So you maybe have like $1 in there. I do like, again, based on what we've been looking at in volume, I do like that the movement that we've been seeing was a high volume today. That was really positive. Now, if we look at sentiment, we can see this thing is just starting to break above the 50% level on the daily. It's been above the 50% level and holding essentially since not necessarily on the 10th, but essentially above the 50% line for about a couple of weeks now, or a week or so. So that's actually really positive. And as I mentioned before, I do think that trend reveals itself when you're on a downward sloping volatility. The thing is, though, with this calculation is that I do think that when you get resets like this, when you get all the way down to what is close to, because this is zero bounded, when you get all the way down and then it starts to break back out, I do think that that is when you're going to see a significant trend change. So with the type of move that we could potentially expect inside of Snap, I would see that this thing, once the volatility resets, probably will gap higher. That's the most likely outcome in my mind, just based on the way that I've been looking at data over time in terms of how like a time series moves. I mean, mean, I know it's a stock, but I'm just thinking about like how time series actually move. What I do like too is that we got a negative correlation while we've got falling volatility. So the reason why I like that is because two negatives end up making a positive, where you're starting to see it either go sideways to up when you have falling volatility and then a negative correlation. So if the correlation actually starts to flip positive while the volatility flips positive, that would be how you potentially get a gap up, at least in a second derivative look in terms of how price would be moving. So that's just how I'm looking at it generally. But if we're looking at what Snap has been doing, what I like, and this is very similar to what I kind of mentioned when we were looking at, I think Nvidia there, was that the price, while it was bearish, right, the price was starting to break above the trade level. Yes, it was kind of flip-flopping back and forth, but I generally like to look at two in a row to be a confirmation. So I would say this would be bearish, still bearish, and then you get 2 days above. So I would have actually said on the 9th when it was at 728, that would have been the day that I've been like, okay, we're starting to see a true actual potential like either bottoming or trend change from this bearish sentiment. Obviously, we are still looking at it was still essentially down on the 5 day, 15 day, 3 month, and 6 month. But if we look at where we are now we're positive on the 1 month, 15 day, 5 day, and 1 day. That's really positive to me, as well as we're seeing that future price path go to price to rise. I do like that. Let's go ahead and look at Grab now. Grab is, if you've traveled and you've actually been able to use a Grab or order food from a Grab, if this is the Grab that I'm thinking in terms of in Southeast Asia, where you can either buy you can get a motorbike, an Uber, you can get food delivered, you can get pretty much anything on Grab. Grab is an interesting company to me because, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the one, but I imagine that it may be. What's interesting to me is that based on the data that I have here, this is an all-time high. So the most recent, the highest high before it looks like was 567, and it looks like now we are officially at 614. So anytime that you're going to see a move where you're going to break an all-time high, I think that's really positive. If we're looking at the overall chart here as well, I do like how we had essentially what looks like a basing here for a little bit, and a little bit of that negative, the bearish return or the bearish sentiment at the time, which is very similar to what I showed in Nvidia earlier. And then you start to see a kind of resumption. This is very looks very similar to Snap actually, in the sense of like how you're getting here. You're getting a bearishness, you're getting a little turn up here to be bullish. Got a little bit of bullishness where you're not really getting a lot of volatility because it's still the turnout of the shares to a certain extent. And then once you break past, there's no owners above you. So what ends up happening is the price can just move because there's no sellers. And what I really like, as I pointed out already, is I like the volume that we're seeing here. Over this volume over the past 3 days, while we're getting this explosion higher, is incredibly positive. And what I really love is this daily sentiment is not that high. So if we're looking at the daily sentiment for today, we're only at 55%. The highest we've had is 57%. Obviously, back here, we're in the high 60s. As I mentioned before, this generally will peak out around the mid to high 60s. If you're bearish, it usually peaks out around like the high 30s to low 40s. But if we're looking at what we can see here, this is actually quite a nice setup. I mean, and very similar to what I mentioned in terms of the previous stock, in terms of Snap, is you can see that there was a falling trend here, right? And I'm assuming we had negative correlation then too. Yeah, so falling volatility with negative correlation was sideways to up motion, and then as you got an explosion and it reset, you're starting to get it to see higher, and now the correlation is going positive. That is exactly how you gap up. That's exactly how you get major gaps and you get major moves inside of a stock. You're gonna be up 8% in a day, 5% in a day, 4% in a day. Those are the type of moves when you're looking at the second derivative kind of stuff. So I'm very positive on what I'm seeing here in Grab. I'd like to buy this thing when it comes back into its normal range. The problem is with stocks like this and this kind of market at this price, especially if you can start to build some sort of like name power in like Twitter or FinTwit or whatever you want to call it, this is where these things can run. So this, what you've essentially seen, or what I've seen, is that this thing has been not necessarily redlining, but it hasn't come back to the normal range since the fourth when it was $5. Since then, it has been moderately high to significantly high to extremely high in its range. Now, that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to come back to the middle of the range. It just means that what you're seeing right now is going to be a high volatility experience. So if you get a down day, it's going to be a massive down day. It's going to be something like I'm sure this thing has had massive down days before where it's like 4% down or 7.5% down. Like those are tough days to swallow. But if you haven't bought and that's an opportunity to buy, that's exactly what I'd be looking for. So Grab is something I'm definitely going to add to my list. Let's go ahead and look. I'm going to skip DNN. Let's look at Intel. I want to look at Intel because Intel is a very interesting stock because obviously it has ownership from the US government now. So you want to be paying attention to a stock that has the weight and the power of the US government behind it, because that means that there's going to be potential buyers that we may not expect. Now, if we're looking, what I do like to see is that essentially this range, while it's been sideways for a while here, and if we look, the stock has essentially been sideways for a long time, except for that drop from 50 down to where we are now. It's actually kind of nice from a basing perspective. If you think back to Snap and you think back to Grab and you think kind of those stocks. But what I really like is that we're seeing essentially the trade range in terms of the red line and the green line are getting really tight together. That means the volatility has fallen. and we've essentially had a move and it's been digested. So now what I would expect is that we're most likely, we don't necessarily have volume starting to break out just yet, but I can see that it's going to be there in a second because we're like that move today was very positive. There was a lot of volume in Intel today, I can tell. Obviously, it wasn't as much as you would expect in terms of like seeing a massive move higher, but you can see this move here. These are going to be people who most likely are not getting out, right? Like these people you see at the very beginning of August when the government took its ownership share and there was a big move up, those people won't sell necessarily because they're not underwater yet, right? As it starts to break out, you may see some selling, so you may have a little bit of disruption as you start to break higher, especially considering that we know that we probably have shareholders higher as well. But if I like what I see is that I like that this thing is still negative in its bullishness. It's got 47% bullishness on the today, and it's got 44% on the 15 week. That's really nice. And as I mentioned, I'm starting to see the volatility start to break down in terms of like it rolling over. I really like that. And you can see we've got negative correlation as well, which means that we would expect the price to go sideways to up. So if there's anything that kind of traps this should be a really nice move that happens pretty quickly. If we're looking, it's 24.77, which is right above the trade level. We can see the top of the range is, again, it's a really tight range right now. So that 25 could turn into 28 really quickly. So I would expect the price to actually break up above the top of the range at some point. I do like to see that it's at 1 day. I do like to see that it's at so it is. I do like what I see in Intel here. I think Intel's got a very bright future. I'll be very curious to see where this goes because I think Intel is definitely one of those things that people are going to be paying attention to. Now I want to look at Mara. Now Mara, I have not looked at. I know that this has been one of those. It's a Bitcoin name specifically. I know there's a lot of people who follow Mara because if you're thinking about what it represents, it's not just a company. I think they mine Bitcoin. I think they have like a trust or something. But if I look at it on the 5 year, like what am I looking at? Like this move, I mean, I respect it, but it's not really doing much. You know what I mean? Like you're potentially going to get a nice move here just because of if we're looking at it, how tight this range is, and we're starting to get a little bit of bullish movement. But again, this hasn't really done anything. We haven't broken $20, I don't think, at all. Yeah, 1997, 1988. We haven't broken $20, and if we have, it hasn't been for a while. Yeah, we obviously were above, barely. You're barely above it, it looks like even back in 2024. But when we're looking at what we can see here in Mara now, I do see a little bit of movement. I do see a little bit of bullishness. We've got 3 days in a row that's confirming to me. I would like to see this thing break up above probably like $16 at least. I do like, I mean, I gotta say I respect the volume that we've seen because the volume has been absolutely remarkable considering the price hasn't really gone anywhere. The sentiment, it's right at the level. It's at 49.5, so you can see a nice move higher. The 15-day is well above, though. It got up to 58% just yesterday, so that's really positive to see that we're seeing a move. As well as recently, we've seen that the volatility is falling, so that's very curious to me because that means that we're most likely going to get a reset. And we're probably going to get an explosion higher. I don't know exactly what it's going to come from, but I assume we're going to get an explosion higher in this. Maybe this is tied to rate cuts. I really don't know because this is how I look at the data here, is how I look at the data in general. So I'm really curious to see what we're going to get out of Mara. The one thing I will say is that the price, you can see it's moderately high, so it is above the middle of the range. It is probably it's about 75 cents or 25 or 50 cents, excuse me, above the trade level. We do have up to 1670. Obviously, that can break much higher very quickly. If we're looking at it's negative on the 1 day and the 15-day, but I would like to see it get positive there. That shouldn't be too difficult, at least on the 15-day. It's only down 31 basis points. On the 3 month, we're only up 12.8%, 12.08%. I only call that out because you could be in anything right now. Like you could just be sitting in the queues, and over the 3 months, you'd be up more than 12.08%. Like you could be like, let's just look real quick. Yeah, over actually, no, you couldn't. So like actually, what am I talking about? You might want to own Mara. The only thing is that if you're looking at the queues, you're gonna feel much safer. But I mean, wow, I really did not expect. I did not expect that. I did not. I thought that Mara and the queues would not be necessarily in sync like that. But I can see right now that the queues. I mean, the queues have had a really tight range too. Let's go ahead and look at Soun. I don't even know what Soun is. I think is it an AI company? I think I've seen people say it's an AI company. I'm not honestly sure. I don't pay attention to it in the way that people do. I just look at the data this way. This is the only way that I look at my data because what am I just gonna be like, oh, let's just look at a chart. What am I gonna do a chart for? All of you are looking at charts. Oh, what do you learn from this? I'm serious. What do you learn from a chart? Like what does that show you? I okay, you have price. Price is a really valuable tool if you can like unpack it a little bit, but I don't think looking at a price is necessarily going to show you anything other than what the price has been doing. That's not good luck. I wish you nothing but the best if you can watch my videos and you can still just look at a blank chart and be like, I got it. But when I look at Sound, I can see that Obviously, we've seen some incredible volatility. We saw an expansion of the range. It looks like it's starting to tighten back up. I don't know if I would expect this thing to have a big move necessarily, just because when I'm thinking about what this could, I mean, long term, this looks like this has a great setup. Short term, and when I say short term, I'm talking like 3 weeks or less. If I'm looking at 3 weeks or less, I'm not sure if this is going to have a massive move. If it's related to its AI, I don't, maybe it's interest rates. I don't know. Maybe they're going to get funding. I have no idea. I mean, I will say that I do like what I'm seeing in terms of the volume here, especially coming off of this bottom, because the bottom, it looks like here, this was very low volume. That's a very good indication that this is a bullish move and a bullish trend. It just hasn't had enough trending movement for me. If I'm looking at the sentiment, we're under the 50% line and we've been there for a while. Obviously, in the 15-day, we are seeing it above the 50% over the past 3 days. That's pretty positive. Again, essentially what I've been describing when looking at like falling volatility, we are resetting most likely in this. So if we're going to get anything, we're probably going to get an explosion. Like just based on the volatility that I'm looking at, we're probably going to get an explosion. Even the standard volatility, it was higher when it was lower, and now we're falling. That is generally pretty positive, and you do have a positive correlation right now. So when this starts to go higher, because it always bases at least at zero, and then it goes higher like that, you do have the opportunity for this thing to actually like smash higher. I mean, I could be my whole analysis of this thing isn't really like moving could be absolutely dead wrong, and you could find yourself like at $20 in tomorrow. It really could, just because the volatility is resetting. So I do like where the price is. If I'm thinking about this, I do like where the price is because you're in the normal range. I love the fact that it's in the normal range and it's been in the normal range. This thing has recently turned bullish at 13.29, it looks like, back in the fourth. That's really positive because you're up a decent amount. That makes people feel pretty comfortable right now. And then I am seeing higher lows. I do like the fact that I'm seeing higher lows in the range, because higher lows mean that the bottom of the range, like you're getting a margin of safety, as they'd say. It's like your parachute has been deployed and you're like, okay, we're slowing down, we're gonna hit the ground, we're gonna hit the ground, like positively, not like a splat where you're getting there too quick, because the bottom of the range coming up means that the wind is at your back to a certain extent. Let's go ahead and see what else we have. Is there anything else that I'm interested in? I'm going to go ahead and look at SoFi. I do find SoFi to be, personally, just being outward, it's been one of the stocks I've been able to trade really well this year, as well as just like sell into it, buy when it drops. It's been really nice generally, because there have been nice pullbacks inside of SoFi, especially in like August, early September. There have been some really nice like pullbacks that have just existed. I do really like this chart. I have to be honest and open about the fact that when I'm looking at, first off, it's been bullish since April. So just the bullishness that I'm seeing is incredibly positive. That is like the true wind at your back. Then I love that when the range gets tight like this, you actually get the proper explosion that you would need, and you can see that it starts to kind of go higher and higher and higher, and it's done it multiple times now. So like you saw it get tight here at the very beginning of August, you saw it get tight here at the very beginning of June, and you saw an explosion higher, and the price just rides the top of the range. And what I love right now is that the top of the range is starting to inflect higher, just a nice glide higher. That's what you want to see. The reason why is because positive bull markets are generally low volatility. If you've ever traded markets for a long period of time, bull markets are generally low volatility. And when you're looking at this chart here in SoFi, this is a low volatility bull market. And that is great, because when you don't have selling pressure and people are just consistently buying, it is either getting added to an index or ETFs, or it's getting chatter, and there's just always a new buyer. That is the type of setup, as well as the fact that it has fundamental purposes, because I imagine that Fed rate cuts are probably going to help them because they are a lending business. So if we're looking at what we're seeing, I love the fact that the volume hasn't been significant unless you've had some of these like crazy days, right? But generally, it's just been staying right at or just a little bit below the average. That's consistent and nice to see. You can tell even when you look at the indicators here, because this thing has essentially had some massive moves. And yeah, you're seeing this thing get to the high 60s. As I pointed out in the earlier part of the video, the high 60s is generally where it'll top out. But when it comes back down to the 50s, yeah, it'll have like a little drop here and there, but it's still just hovering right above it. And I love that it's at like 50, 51, 52, 52.3. That's a great level to stay at, because that's a sustainable bull market inside of an individual stock. Now, if we look at what we're seeing in the volatility, as I've mentioned, I believe that volatility or trend reveals itself in low volatility or falling volatility experiences. So I see that we've got volatility starting to fall slightly here. We're going negative. The negative and the falling volatility in terms of correlation, what I love about that is that means sideways to up. So I'm very positive what I'm seeing here inside of SoFi. The only thing that I would say is probably the little issue, and this is exactly why I sold a little bit today, was because it's significantly high. Like once you get this high, you can only go extremely high, but I assume that you're most likely to come down to moderate as well as to normal. That's a really positive sign, again, for a bull market long term. But what I want to do is I want to sell when you get moderately high, and then I want to buy back when you're in your normal range. That's how I've been trading it generally, because I'm paying attention to like what is a bull market. A bull market has highs, it has pullbacks, it has highs, it has pullbacks. I want to sell into the highs and I want to buy in the pullbacks. I just want to keep on riding the positions so that I can continue to make a little bit more alpha than I would from just sitting in it. Now, if we're looking at where the trade level is, it's at 25.21. Obviously, it's jumped quite a bit, but that doesn't mean that necessarily we can't go back to it. We're still about $2 or 225 or 250 above it. We can easily come back to that. Now, again, I mentioned this earlier when we were looking. I love a higher high inside of the range. I think a higher high is one of the greatest signals that you can see inside of a trade range overall. And when you're looking at things that are going to be on the most active list, it's not going to be hard to imagine that you're going to find things that are having higher highs, higher lows, and a bullish trend, even if it has a little bit of a pullback. Like when it goes bearish, what you notice is that it doesn't go below its trend level. Right? It goes below it like randomly, but it's bullish those days. So those are great opportunities to buy, great opportunities to set up, great opportunities to enter. I'm just looking at this from a longer term thing that I could probably continue to buy and sell into the end of the year. We'll see what the end of the year looks like. But for right now, this looks like something that I can buy and sell into October, November, December, even buy calls into January and just trade them in and out. So I'm really positive what I'm seeing in SoFi. So that's essentially been me running through the most active stocks in Yahoo Finance for today, at least in what I was most interested in. I know there's probably other stocks people are interested in, but if you want to, you can always go ahead and give me a follow on Twitter. You can follow me on Bootleg Macro. If you're interested in getting like a daily update from me, I do have something that's called the crypto newsletter. If you made it this far, you're more interested in stocks potentially, but I do have a crypto newsletter that I send out. It's actually really nice. It essentially gives you, it's essentially this page right here, which is where this is like a premium page on this app. But if you're looking at it, what it's going to do is going to give you, I think, 19 different individual cryptos. It's going to give you all of this. It's going to give you the higher highs all the way through. It's going to give you like the same like color guide for the volume and everything like that. It comes out every single morning, I think 6:15 in the morning on the East Coast, so pretty early for anybody who's on the West Coast. But it does give you the close. It gives you the exact same, like the pricing guide in terms of the color and pricing guide, very similar to what we just looked at. You get volume, you get sentiment, you get trade level, you get buy bottom, sell top, everything in between, the high and the low. And then once you actually subscribe, if you subscribe to premium, what you actually get is you get access to this. So again, if you're interested, you can go to the traderangers.com/crypto newsletter. You can sign up for the weekly. What you'll do on the weekly is you will end up getting on the weekly, you'll get it on Saturdays at 11 a.m. The data refreshes right before. If not, you'll just get it every single morning at 6:15. It's like $10. So if you find these interesting, if you're interested in crypto, if you think that this app is cool, you can always go ahead and sign up at traderangers.com. You can sign up for free. If you're doing the free version, you do get 30 searches a day. You end up getting portfolio where you can add stock if you want to track yourself. I've got alerts on here. You can do that all for free as well. One of the things that I do really appreciate about this is that obviously I can have like this is a larger portfolio of like stocks that I'm just like tracking, which is why it takes a little bit to load and it doesn't have the lazy loading like the other one. But it does give you the ability to like kind of follow some of the own stocks that you may want to follow yourself. You get sectors. This is going to be like just the main sectors from the S&P 500. I find this to be really useful because it gives me an idea of like, okay, where should I be fishing? Like, what are the sectors that are even hot? What are the sectors I should be paying attention to? Then as well, I give you macro. I'm really interested, just generally, there's like 34 stocks it looks like that I generally follow. Most of them are going to be like the major stocks that everybody's going to be following: the dollar, Qs, small caps, emerging markets, China, bonds, oil, gold, copper. And then I do follow like the Mag 7, like the big stocks that exist in the market. Obviously, we can see right now Apple is pretty bearish, Amazon's pretty bearish, CRM, Nvda, Meta, even Microsoft. It's actually, just looking at this, I'm really surprised by that just based on the movements that we've seen. But signals don't lie. So tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love for you to sign up for the crypto newsletter if you're interested. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter, and I will talk to you soon.